The paradox of choice. Imagine standing in front of a wall of 200 different types of cereal. Initially, you feel a sense of liberation. You think, somewhere in this sea of cardboard boxes is the perfect crunch, the perfect sweetness, the perfect breakfast. But as minutes pass, something strange happens. You feel a tightness in your chest. You begin to compare the fiber content of one box with the sugar content of another. You start to wonder if the box you don't choose would have tasted better. Eventually, you leave the store with nothing. Or you pick a box at random and feel a nagging sense of regret the entire time you're eating it. This is the paradox of choice, a psychological phenomenon famously detailed by Barry Schwartz, and it is the foundational architecture of the modern dating nightmare. In the pre-digital era, your dating pool was limited by geography, social circles, and sheer luck. You chose from the people in your town, your office, or your church. Your brain could handle this. It could evaluate 5 or 6 candidates and make a reasoned decision. But today, dating apps like Tinder and Bumble have replaced the local pub with a global supermarket of human beings. When the human brain is presented with an effectively infinite number of options, it doesn't become more efficient at choosing. It suffers a total system failure known as analysis paralysis. Psychologically, having too many options triggers a maximizer mindset. Instead of looking for someone who is good enough, a satisficer, we become obsessed with finding the absolute best. This creates a chronic dissatisfaction. Even when we meet someone incredible, our option value remains high. We think, she's great, but what if the girl I swipe on tomorrow is even better? This leads to a disposable culture. Because the cost of finding a new person is just one swipe away, we stop investing in the difficult work of building a relationship. We treat people like software updates. If there's a single bug or a minor inconvenience, we don't try to fix it. We just wait for the next version. We have traded the depth of connection for the breadth of possibility. And in doing so, we have made ourselves profoundly lonely in a world of infinite choice.
Hypergamy and evolution. For the vast majority of human history, the mating marketplace was governed by rigid survival needs. Evolution hardwired us with specific filters. Men generally sought markers of fertility and health, while women sought markers of status, protection, and resource acquisition. This is hypergamy, the tendency to marry up or seek a partner of equal or higher social and economic standing. While modern society has made incredible strides towards gender equality, our biological legacy hardware hasn't received the memo. This creates a massive psychological friction point in the 2026 dating landscape. As women have moved into higher education and high-paying careers, often outperforming their male counterparts in urban centers, the pool of men who meet the traditional hypergamistic criteria is shrinking. When a woman reaches the top 20% of earners, her instinctual drive often still pushes her to look for a man in that same top 20% or higher. This creates a marriage squeeze at the top of the social hierarchy. Meanwhile, a large segment of the male population feels increasingly obsolete or invisible because they cannot provide the alpha status that the evolutionary brain is searching for. This mismatch leads to what sociologists call the loneliness epidemic among men and burnout among women. Men feel they are being judged by an outdated metric of provider that they cannot no longer fulfill in a post-industrial economy, while women feel there are no good men left because they are looking for a rare intersection of modern emotional intelligence and archaic provider status. We are living in a transition period where our cultural values say equality, but our limbic systems are still screaming survival of the fittest. This biological cultural lag causes immense resentment, as both genders feel the other side has unrealistic expectations, when in reality, we are all just victims of a brain that hasn't evolved as fast as our economy.
The ick factor. You're on a great date. The conversation is flowing, the chemistry's there, and you're already imagining the next time you'll see them. Then they do something small. Maybe they hold their spoon in a weird way. Maybe they use a specific slang word that grates on your ears. Or maybe they run to catch a bus and look a bit clumsy. Suddenly, a wave of visceral revulsion washes over you. You want to be anywhere else. This is the ick. And while it seems like a petty personality flaw, it is actually a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism rooted in our behavioral immune system. Disgust is one of our most primal emotions. Its original purpose was to keep us away from pathogens, rotting meat, and poisonous plants. In the context of dating, the ick is often the brain's way of forcing a hard reboot on attraction when it detects a subtle genetic or personality mismatch that the conscious mind hasn't identified yet. It is an involuntary veto power exercised by the subconscious. However, in the age of hyper-curated social media and the paradox of choice, the ick has become hypersensitized. For those with avoidant attachment styles, the ick serves as a convenient exit ramp. When a relationship starts getting too close or too real, the brain panics. It views intimacy as a threat to independence. To protect itself, it goes on a search and destroy mission for a reason to be repulsed. By focusing on a trivial flaw, like the way someone ties their shoes, the brain can justify breaking off the connection without having to face the terrifying reality of vulnerability. We have pathologized the normal humanness of our partners. We are looking for polished icons, and the moment the ick reminds us that they are a messy, breathing, flawed human being, we flee.
Situationships. The situationship is the ultimate 2026 relationship glitch. It's a state of intimacy without accountability. It's a relationship that has all the trappings of a romantic bond, regular communication, sex, emotional support, but lacks the label of commitment. Psychologically, the rise of the situationship is driven by loss aversion and the option value of the future. In an era where we are constantly told to keep our options open, committing to one person feels like a massive financial sunk cost. By keeping a relationship undefined, individuals feel they are hedging their bets. They want the dopamine of a partner without the social risk of a breakup or the identity cost of being off the market. However, this creates a state of chronic psychological stress. Human beings are meaning-making animals. We crave narrative clarity. When we are in a situationship, our brains are stuck in a loop of uncertainty. This triggers intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological trick used by slot machines. Because we don't know when the reward, attention, affection, validation, is coming, we stay hooked. The lack of structure in a situationship prevents the transition from passionate love, driven by dopamine and novelty, to companionate love, driven by oxytocin and security. We stay in a permanent state of high alert, wondering if we are enough or if the other person is still swiping. This prevents true vulnerability. You can't truly show someone your shadow self if you're worried they'll disappear the moment things get too serious. The situationship is the fast food of intimacy. It fills the immediate hunger, but it leaves the soul malnourished. We are the most connected generation in human history, yet we are arguably the most relationally starved. This is because we have confused information exchange with connection. A text message is a packet of data. A face-to-face conversation is a biological symphony. When you sit across from someone, your brain is performing millions of micro-calculations per second. You are tracking pupil dilation, skin conductance, microtremors in the voice, and the pheromonal scent of the other person. This synchronous communication triggers the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone that builds trust and lowers cortisol. Digital communication, texting, DMing, and even video calls, is asynchronous and low bandwidth. It lacks the mirror neuron activation required for true empathy. When you text, you are interacting with a mental representation of the person, not the person themselves. This creates an empathy gap. It is much easier to be dismissive, cold, or ghost someone through a screen because your brain doesn't fully register them as a conspecific, a fellow human being with feelings. Furthermore, digital intimacy is a dopamine trap. Every notification, every like, every scene receipt provides a tiny hit of dopamine. We become addicted to the ping of the connection rather than the presence of the person. This leads to digital burnout. We spend weeks getting to know someone over text, building an idealized version of them in our heads, only to feel a profound lack of chemistry when we finally meet in person. We've exhausted the story before the experience even begins. We are trying to build skyscrapers of intimacy on a foundation of digital pixels, and we wonder why they collapse at the first sign of real-world wind.
Orbiting and ghosting. Ghosting has become the standard operating procedure for ending relationships in the 21st century. It is the ultimate expression of conflict avoidance. Psychologically, ghosting is a form of social death.
To the person being ghosted, the sudden silence triggers the same areas of the brain that process physical pain. Because there's no closure, the brain enters a state of cognitive dissonance, trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. This triggers the zygote effect, the psychological tendency to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. You can't stop thinking about the ghost because the story isn't finished. But there is a weirder, more modern phenomenon: orbiting. This is when someone ghosts you. They stop replying to your texts and calls, but they continue to watch your life through social media. They're the first to view your Instagram stories. They might even like a photo from 3 weeks ago. This is ego hedging at its finest. By orbiting, the ghoster is maintaining a low-stakes presence in your life. They want the social proof of knowing what you're doing without the emotional labor of interacting with you. For the person being orbited, it feels like a haunting. It prevents the psychological process of mourning the relationship. You can't move on because their digital ghost is constantly popping up in your notifications. It keeps the anxious attachment system in a state of permanent activation. We have created a world where you can leave someone without ever actually leaving their digital orbit, turning the end of a relationship into a long, drawn-out psychological war of attrition.
The 80-20 rule in dating. If you apply data science to dating apps, you find a terrifying reality. The sexual marketplace is one of the most unequal economies on Earth. This is the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. In various studies of dating app behavior, it has been observed that the top 20% of high-status men receive nearly 80% of the attention from the female population. Conversely, the bottom 80% of men are left to compete for the remaining 20% of attention. This creates a winner-take-all dynamic that is psychologically damaging to everyone involved. For the top 20% of men, the overwhelming amount of choice leads to inflated ego and a total devaluation of commitment. They become serial samplers, moving from one partner to the next because the algorithm tells them there is always an upgrade available. They have no incentive to settle down, which fuels the situationship epidemic. For the bottom 80% of men, the experience is one of chronic invisibility. This leads to relative deprivation, the feeling that everyone else is having a party that you weren't invited to. This is a primary driver of the incel, involuntary celibate subculture, and the radicalization of lonely men. On the other side, women often feel betrayed because their primary interactions on these apps are with the top 20% men who refuse to commit. They assume all men are like this, not realizing they are interacting with a statistical anomaly created by the app's architecture. We are all being funneled into a hyper-competitive game where the house, the app, always wins, and the players are left with dating fatigue and a distorted view of the opposite gender.
Attachment styles. Anxious versus avoidant. The toxic dance that feels like chemistry. Why do we keep falling for the people who are bad for us? The answer lies in attachment theory. About 50% of the population has a secure attachment style. They're comfortable with intimacy and don't fear being alone. But secure people tend to find partners and stay in relationships, meaning they are rarely on the dating apps. The dating market is disproportionately populated by insecure types, the anxious and the avoidant. When an anxious person who craves closeness to feel safe meets an avoidant person who craves distance to feel safe, it creates a psychological feedback loop that feels like intense chemistry. The anxious person pushes for intimacy, which triggers the avoidant's deactivation strategies. The avoidant pulls away, which triggers the anxious person's protest behavior, clinging, calling, panicking. This push-pull dynamic creates massive spikes in cortisol and dopamine. We mistake this emotional roller coaster for passion. We think, if I'm this upset about them, I must really love them. In reality, it's just your nervous system being hijacked by childhood trauma. A secure relationship, by comparison, can feel boring to someone used to the chaos. We have been conditioned by media and our own neurochemistry to seek the spark. But often the spark is just the sound of two incompatible attachment styles short-circuiting each other. We are addicted to the toxicity because it feels familiar, while stability feels like a lack of spark.
Pornography and perception. We are currently living through the largest uncontrolled psychological experiment in history, the pornification of the human brain.
Chronic exposure to high-novelty, high-intensity digital sexual content has fundamentally altered the reward circuitry of the brain, specifically the nucleus accumbens and dopamine D2 receptors. When you watch pornography, you are triggering the Coolidge effect, a biological phenomenon where the brain is resensitized to sexual novelty by the introduction of a new partner. In nature, this required effort and time. On a screen, you can rotate through thousands of partners in a single session. This leads to dopamine desensitization. Over time, the brain requires higher and higher levels of stimulation to feel aroused. This has a devastating impact on real-world dating. Real human beings who have imperfections, who require emotional labor, and who move at a natural human pace cannot compete with the superstimulus of the screen. This leads to PIED, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, and delayed ejaculation in men, and a general sexual anhedonia, or lack of interest, in both genders. We are simulating our reproductive drives so effectively that the real-world version feels like work. We have short-circuited our reward system, leading to a generation that is hypersexualized in theory, but asexual in practice. We are starving in a world of digital abundance because we have forgotten how to digest real food.
The soulmate myth. The final boss of the dating nightmare is the soulmate myth. We have been raised on a diet of Disney logic and romantic comedies that suggest love is a discovery rather than a creation. We are taught that there's the one out there, a perfect missing piece to our puzzle, who will understand us without words and complete us without effort. Psychologically, this is known as a destiny mindset. People who hold this view believe that relationships are either meant to be or not. This is a recipe for disaster. When a destiny couple hits their first real conflict, they don't see it as an opportunity for growth. They see it as evidence that they aren't soulmates. They quit. On the other hand, people with a growth mindset see relationships as a skill to be practiced. They understand that compatibility is something you earn through years of compromise, shared values, and hard work. The soulmate myth makes us hypercritical. We look for red flags in every minor disagreement. We have become relationship perfectionists in a world of human imperfection. We are waiting for a lightning bolt of certainty that never comes, while we ignore the slow burn of a genuine connection that could actually sustain us. We have traded devotion for optimization, and we wonder why our hearts feel like empty spreadsheets. Modern dating isn't failing because people are worse. It's failing because we are asking for a god to walk through the door, when all we really need is a partner. We are looking for the finish line before we've even started the race.